My name is Nicole Garami. I'm a speech pathologist and the author of The Narrative Builder, a multi-sensory narrative teaching tool published by Northern Speech Services. I developed the Narrative Builder because in working with children with autism spectrum disorder and language disorders, I noticed that they had a hard time understanding what they read. They also had a really hard time retelling a story. As well, many parents have told me that their child cannot tell them what happened during their day, whether it was a school trip or something interesting that happened to them. The Narrative Builder tool has 3 purposes. The first is reading comprehension. The second is to help a child retell a story, whether it's a fictional story or a personal narrative, which is a true story. The third purpose is to help the child retell the narrative in writing. In the first step, if the child is reading a fictional story, the adult can sit with the child and fill out the story grammar elements. For example, the adult would say, "Who's in this story?" and write down the characters on the magnet. The adult can write the characters or the child can write the characters down. Then the adult will say, "Where is this story happening?" and get the setting. That's the where and the when. Next, as events happen in the story, the adult helps the child write them on the magnets. They are then arranged from left to right in sequential order. You'll see at the top of the magnet, it does say first, then, and finally, so that as the child retells the story, he can use those transition words and give more coherence to the story. In the second step, the child actually retells the story. He's able to look at all the story grammar elements. He can say who is in the story, where it took place, and then tell it in the sequential order, giving the story or the narrative cohesion and coherence. Finally, if the child needs to write a story summary, the board can be flipped over and the magnets can be arranged on the left-hand side from top to bottom. The child then actually writes on a piece of paper which is attached to the magnet board. Then, as the child writes, he can look to the left and see what happened in the story. Those transition words are on each magnet, so he can write, first, Arthur went to a birthday party, for example, and then go through the story as it happened and write it down. For personal narratives, such as when the child wants to tell about a birthday party, the child can fill out the magnets as he talks with the therapist or the adult. The child will tell the therapist who was at the party or who the party was for example, and where it took place and when it happened. The therapist is able to use cueing to ask the child some of that information if he or she can't remember it. Then, as the child tells the story, he writes them on the magnets, or if writing is difficult, the adult can write it down for him. The magnets are then arranged in the same fashion from left to right.
It's just a great tool. It's a great way for them to understand what they've read, to retell what they've read, and also to tell their own stories. They can get a picture in their mind of the chronology of events, because that's a challenge for a lot of my students. The fact that it's a physical thing, there's manipulable magnets, they can write on it, means that multiple kids can use it at the same time. It helps them understand that it's not just what's going on in their own head that's happening. They can put down feelings that other people had. They have to put things in the correct order instead of just telling a story that doesn't make any sense or flow together. And they have the visual aids in front of them to help them do that when they use the board.
Another difficulty with children on the autism spectrum is that they have a hard time understanding perspective. So when they read a story, they may not understand a character's intentions or feelings. The Narrative Builder allows for the adult to help the child with just that. We have magnets for what's called the internal response. These are small thought bubbles that the child can fill out and put under each event. The thought bubbles allow the child to write in the internal response of the character. For example, the child might write, "He was so excited," or "He was so frustrated." So that way, the child understands the character's motivations and intentions and can also retell them. As well, when telling a personal narrative, the child can tell how he felt during a certain event. Let's say the child had an exciting field trip. He could say, "It was so awesome," under the event that corresponds to that feeling. Research has shown that children on the autism spectrum tend to have difficulties with executive functioning and with central coherence. Executive functioning is the planning, problem solving, and sequencing, all of which are extremely important in telling a narrative. Central cohesion is understanding the big picture and not getting focused on just a few details, which tends to happen with children on the autism spectrum. They're not sure which details are important to the story. By using the narrative builder, the child is able to understand what the important elements are because they're all laid out on the magnets. The adult helps the child to determine those elements and write them down, whether it's to retell the story, to comprehend a story, or to write a story summary. Many patients will come into my office and say, "My child had a great experience at a birthday party, but wasn't able to tell my husband," for example. So I'll sit with the child and say, "Johnny, tell me about the birthday party." The child will then have difficulty typically telling me the story in order. So as I sit with him, having had some idea from the mom about what happened, I can help him recreate that story and actually practice it. The interesting part is that after we've practiced it 2 or 3 times, I can take the magnet board away, and in general, the child can still retell that story in order, so the carryover benefits are pretty immediate. I have found in my practice that children really enjoy using the narrative builder. They love anything with magnets, and having a dry erase marker is fun for them. They like to write on the magnets and arrange them on the board. And because it's a very interactive tool, the kids have a discussion with the therapist or the adult. It makes storytelling fun. The narrative builder was designed for children ages 5 and upward. It's also designed for children who have any level of language impairment. The Narrative Builder tool is available online at northernspeechservices.com.